challenging Ottawa on the carbon tax carve-out. Alberta's Minister of Justice is next on Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow.
The top news stories
and conversations that matter to you.
This is Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
The Alberta government wants the federal court to offer an opinion on what's known as the carbon tax carve-out. That's the exemption on paying the carbon tax that the Trudeau government gave to Canadians who use furnace oil to heat their homes. The Minister of Justice in Alberta is Mickey Amery. Joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Minister.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. Why is your government doing this?
Well, we're doing it for a number of reasons. We know that this is an inherently unfair exemption. We know that it's unlawful, and we know it's unconstitutional. And for those reasons, and for the reasons that Albertans in all areas have said that the carbon tax is a tax that they do not want in this province, we share that opinion, and we're challenging it for those reasons.
Okay. The Liberals in Ottawa say the carbon tax is settled law. It was taken all the way to the Supreme Court. Provinces lost. The federal government won on the carbon tax. What's your response to that?
Well, let me clarify some things. The carbon tax was never upheld by the Supreme Court as a valid exercise of the federal taxation power. It was instead upheld through a new federal power to establish minimum standards of price stringency for carbon emissions. Here, the problem is that with this pricing exemption for home heating oil, they aren't setting any minimum standards at all. That is to say that the federal government is creating exemptions for one part of the country while ignoring other parts of the country who use different types of heating, like natural gas, for example, that we use here in Alberta. The whole premise of the reason it was upheld by the Supreme Court is completely different from what they're doing with this exemption. We think it's, again, unfair. It's wrong. It disproportionately supports one region of our country at the expense of another, and it's unconstitutional, and that's why we think we're going back to court.
Okay. Why do you say it's unconstitutional?
Well, for the reason that it's the Supreme Court of Canada said that the carbon tax was a legitimate practice or policy that is to establish minimum standards of pricing for carbon emissions. That is a minimum pricing standard for carbon emissions uniformly across the country. The pricing exemption here for those who use home heating oils to heat their homes, the exemption in doing so does not have anything to do with the reason that the Supreme Court upheld the carbon tax. By saying that some parts of the country are exempt from paying the carbon tax for home heating, while others are not, it creates, a divisive environment that the carbon tax is applied in different ways across the country, and for that reason, we're challenging it on the constitutionality of it. We're also challenging it on the fact that it's unlawful because it doesn't actually meet the purposes of the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. It is it's an exemption for what we think is a emission-intensive fuel that is contrary to what the whole purpose of the carbon tax was described as trying to achieve. Natural gas is far cleaner, it's more efficient, it's more environmentally responsible than home heating oil. And for those reasons, we think that Canadians here in Western Canada are being punished by not being exempt from the carbon tax.
Right. That it actually undermines any defense of the carbon tax as a climate change fighting initiative.
Yeah, well, if we accept the whole premise of the carbon tax, if we accept that taxing Canadians in order to achieve a certain environmental goals and making sure that the carbon tax helps to fund the initiatives, it goes contrary to what we think is any type of reason here. We think that when you have a home heating fuel that is clean and efficient and responsible, and is derived from a Canadian energy sector that is the most ethical on the planet, That is the type of thing that the federal government should be looking at when saying that these are things that we should provide exemptions for, not the type of heating that is far less environmentally responsible than natural gas, for example.
Why do you think they did it?
Well, I've got my own theories about why they did it, but certainly if you look at the numbers and the way that home heating oil is used across the country, it disproportionately favors those in Atlantic and Eastern Canada at the expense of Western Canada. The stats speak for themselves. When you look at Western Canada, less than 1% of homes in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan use home heating oils as their primary source of heating. But when we look at Atlantic Canada, up to 40%, for example, of some provinces and some Canadians use this particular type of heating for their homes. So you can draw your own conclusions from that, but certainly we know that applying different rules to different areas of the country is just inherently wrong, and that's exactly why we're doing this.
Okay, reporters yesterday on Parliament Hill were staking out the caucus meeting for the Liberals. You may have heard there's been some Liberal turmoil in Ottawa, Minister. They managed to corner Randy Boissonnault, who's a Liberal from Edmonton. They asked him about this request for a judicial review. This is what he said.
I know what I think about that. 65% of the residents of Edmonton Centre want us to fight climate change each and every day. And, you know, when I was doing doors during the pandemic, while COVID was raging, the number one issue on the doors was climate change. And so we have to have a price on pollution. And the province wants to keep taking us to court. They can do what they think they need to do. But I can tell you Albertans want to save the planet. And the greenest barrel of oil is the barrel of oil that the rest of the world is going to want the most.
Okay. It's about saving the planet, he says. Minister.
Yeah, I'd like to see empirical evidence of that, to see exactly how a tax on carbon is actually improving climate change and addressing the climate crisis. We know that we too share in the concerns of making sure that we're environmentally responsible, but we are the most environmentally responsible energy sector on the planet. We are the most ethical on the planet. We provide the best quality fuels in the world. And quite frankly, I'm encouraged by the idea that if the federal Liberal government truly believes that people are asking for the carbon tax, then they should run a carbon tax election and get the mandate to impose it on Canadians.
Okay,
and we'll deal with it as it comes.
Alberta, Minister, we're just a little tight on time. Alberta wasn't the only province to challenge the validity of the carbon tax in court and take that to the Supreme Court. When it comes to the request for this review, do you have other provinces who have expressed an interest in joining your fight? Most
certainly. We are regularly working with other provinces and exploring their desire to work with us on these things. As you know, a number of our neighbors have just gone through elections, so there is somewhat of a change in what is happening in both BC and Saskatchewan. But we've approached both of those governments with the idea of working together on this particular issue. I believe that we'll have the support of other provinces. This is a very innovative judicial review application, but I think that it is well grounded in law, and I think we'll be successful. We shall see. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Well, thank you very much for having me. Have a good day. Mickey Amery, Minister of Justice in Alberta. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
With our friend on the right side of things, syndicated columnist, speechwriter for former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Michael Taube, back with us. How are you?
I'm good, Rob. How are you doing today?
I'm good. This week, if you're reading the National Post, you'll read a column from Michael Taube where he argues that Donald Trump would be the better choice for U.S. president over Kamala Harris. Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, look, as I said in the column, and I've said this, what feels like a million times over the past decade, you know, I'm not a Trump supporter. I never have been. I've never regarded Trump as either a conservative or Republican in either the modern or traditional definition of the words, terms, and ideology. I've been fairly middle of the road about him since literally the day that he went down on that golden escalator, and it hasn't really changed that much. I was more frustrated with what I saw about him early on, but I've gradually, as the years gone along, began to understand, not necessarily how his mind works, but how his decisions come about. In other words, why he takes certain strategies, why he fights back with, everyone from people in the media all the way into cabinet members, how he picks and chooses certain issues to focus on and so forth. The point being that it's actually very simple if you look at it realistically. When you compare Donald Trump to Kamala Harris, who is the Democratic presidential candidate, on the other side, there really is no comparison because Donald Trump on his worst day, as I wrote in my column, would be far better and a far better choice than Kamala Harris on her best. Because Harris, unfortunately, when it comes to politics, there is just nothing of substance in this woman. Nothing. I've written about this several times for different publications, including The Post. Absolutely nothing. It's debatable how much substance she has in her chosen profession in the law because of based on certain cases and things she's done, but we don't have time to litigate that, so to speak. When it comes to politics, it is clear by the lack of policy knowledge, the lack of understanding of issues, the inability to actually speak and discuss things in a logical, intelligent, rational manner, there is nothing of substance there. Senior Democrats realize this, Rob. Sometimes they've spoken out. Most of them have spoken privately. We know about the little kerfuffle or the little thing that happened with Joe Biden and Barack Obama that, lip readers looked at. I don't know if it's legitimate, but certainly what they were discussing, if it's true, was that they don't have a lot of faith in Kamala Harris's candidacy. And if it's true, I don't blame them. It's though she is the weakest candidate put forward by a major party. But more importantly, and I've discussed this with you in the past, Kamala Harris is the most left-wing person ever put up, certainly by the Democratic Party. And for that reason, especially when you look at the history of the United States, the ideas it holds near and dear to its heart in politics, in economics, and in culture, she does not fit or resemble the average American voter. And for the rational position that others are saying, or irrational in most cases, that the reason that they're going to bite their tongues and vote for her, which, never Trumpers and other disgruntled Republicans have claimed on ad nauseum, is because she's not Donald Trump, when everything she represents is anathema compared to what they have believed in or purport to believe all these years. There's no comparison. Donald Trump would be a better leader in terms of his economic point of view. We know that he uses tariffs and economic nationalism as sort of political tools to get his way. But by and large, like most Republicans and most conservatives, he at least respects in principle the nature of the free market, of tax cuts, of smaller government, etc. When it comes to foreign policy, to compare Donald Trump to Kamala Harris, there is no comparison. For all the pot stirring that he occasionally does, which I think is probably the best way to explain it, and we know he's done a lot of it, he still, at least if nothing else, sits confidently at the table, speaks confidently about his ideas, whether you agree with them or not, and the world will listen to him, partly because they have to, they have no choice, and other because, much like the people who are biting their tongues and voting, a lot of world leaders also realize they have to bite their tongues and deal with him. Could Kamala Harris really come up? Would anyone really have the confidence that she could handle difficult matters like Russia and Ukraine or Israel and Hamas? There's nothing there. There's no substance. She's never worked in foreign policy. She doesn't understand it. This is not on-the-job training for her. We don't need this at this stage. And Trump, yes, he had no political experience previously, but because he was a businessman and did various things, he at least understood the give and take of how to deal with different individuals and groups and was basically more of a business leader who could then take those models and build into politics, whereas she, as a lawyer, sure, she may understand some things. She can read briefing books and stuff, but she has no on-the-job training whatsoever.
Okay. Look, we're gonna stop here. I have a couple of more questions that I just want to throw at you. I also want to talk about CFL this weekend. I love CFL football. I know you do too. So, the playoffs are starting in the Canadian Football League this weekend. A big matchup between Toronto and Ottawa. I'll ask Michael about it. He's in Toronto. We're in Ottawa. This is News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
We're back with Michael Taube. Tuesday, of course, the big day. It's the U.S. presidential election campaign, election day in the United States, up and down the ticket. Let me ask you, this whole thing about garbage. Puerto Rico's a floating island of garbage, the comedian said at the rally, Madison Square Garden. And then Joe Biden, in remarks, said Donald Trump's supporters are garbage.
Yeah.
Who do you think that hurts more? You have any idea?
That's a tough question. I mean, because it's so late in the campaign,
Yeah.
I don't think the impact will be quite the same as when Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters in 2016 a basket of deplorables. It's similar, but there was more time for it to fester, I guess is probably the best way to say it. But is it messy? Yes, on both ends. Where is it worse? I think at this stage, to be perfectly honest, Rob, because we obviously want to talk about the CFL, I think we can wrap it up in a neat little bow this way.
Yeah.
Is it really going to make a big difference with people who are sitting on the fence? No, because there aren't that many fence sitters left. I think we can say that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, only about 2.5 minutes left. Look, the Red Blacks, the Ottawa Red Blacks in the CFL had a great start to the season, and then they really struggled down the stretch.
Right.
The Argos, I know you are cheering for the Argos, but you are a season ticket holder because you like CFL football.
Correct.
So you've seen a lot of Argos football. They had a terrible start to the season.
Horrid.
And then they got hot down the stretch. So
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a great game. I think it could be a real gunslinger fest. I think a lot of points. I think 40 points it's going to take 40 points to win this game. And then the winner would play Montreal. Way I see things right now, I think it could very much be a Montreal-Winnipeg Grey Cup final again. Mm-hmm. I think those have been two pretty good teams. But what do you think? Just Ottawa-Toronto. Give me a prediction. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, if we look at just Ottawa-Toronto, if we look at the last game, which was the last home game of the season a couple weeks ago, Toronto got off to a massive lead. It looked like it was going to be their biggest victory of the season. And all of a sudden, Ottawa at the very end scored 25 unanswered points in the fourth quarter and almost won the thing at the very end with a series of laterals at the last second that got them to just about, I forget exactly, I'm not saying in front of it, but close to the 20-yard line, just a little bit more. Had there been one or two more successful laterals, who knows what would have happened. In the end, the Argos won, and that's why they clinched second place and have home advantage. But it was a much tighter game than it should have been. I mean, you could see something like that yet again happening. I think it's certainly possible. Again, a lot of it depends on players like Chad Kelly, the quarterback, and how well he does. John Ryan Grant, they're great guy when terms, just for kickoff returns. Yeah. The problem with Grant, unfortunately, in the last game against Ottawa, he got stymied pretty badly. Also had a late fumble and had some issues.
So give me a prediction.
Let's go, to be fair and nothing personal, I'll take Argos by 3. Wouldn't shock me if someone got 40 in the win.
All right. And I'll take the Red Blacks by a field goal. Red Blacks by a field goal.
Done.
And we'll check in.
Montreal Winnipeg's Grey Cup makes sense to me, though.
Check in next week. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Michael Taube. Back after the news. It is time for the Newsday panel. Allie Blades is with us, Frame Point Public Affairs. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Great to hear from you. Congratulations on the new gig.
Thank you.
And Ashton Arsenault is here, partner at Crestview Strategy. How are you, Ashton?
Well, Rob, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. The unhappy Liberals seem to have been placated, and some changes, I would say, have been implemented on the Liberal side. There was the big climb down on immigration, rollback in permanent residency positions. I am sure Liberal MPs were hearing about immigration at the doors and in their constituency offices. There will be attack ads against Pierre Poilievre. They're working on attack ads against Pierre Poilievre. Ashton, what else would you expect to see from a long-awaited Liberal counterattack against Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives?
So have they been placated?
Oh, I think so.
I actually don't think the rabble-rousers have been placated at all. And the last I heard, they were still calling for a secret ballot vote, which, according to one outspoken Liberal MP, the Prime Minister would lose. Hardly seems to be rosy times over in that caucus, and anybody trying to sell me different is going to have to show me the campfire songs and the kumbayas, because I just don't buy it. You mentioned immigration. Look, they've essentially demolished the Liberal government, of course, a century-old consensus, and have overloaded the system, and now they're walking it back. So I guess, sure, let's give them credit for attempting to clean up the mess that they're responsible for, but have you seen any polling on immigration recently? Canadians are wicked angry, and it's a very difficult situation. And look, attack ads, I don't know what's taken them this long. I don't know if it's a money thing. I know they're badly being out fundraised. Was it that they couldn't come up with a good enough narrative? I'm not sure. It all strikes me as a day late and a dollar short. Personally, I'm actually looking forward to seeing them. What else they could do? I think that boils down to whether or not they can get their numbers up. And I just don't see a pathway for them to be able to do that. If you're banking on cleaning up your mess, translating into improved poll numbers. I just don't see it, Rob.
Okay. Well, let's build on what Ashton has been saying there. I said that they seem to be placated. Ashton doesn't buy it. He thinks the rebels are as active as ever. How do you see that, first of all, Allie?
Well, I suspect that's accurate, Ashton, but they, as we get closer to the election, the Liberal Party has to actually come up with a bit of a strategy on how to create their own better narrative and describe a narrative of dysfunction for the Conservatives in order for them to even save some of their seats. And so regardless of the dynamics that are happening, these are campaign tactics that this is the timeline in which they happen. And so, what I'm about to say is don't come after me when the Liberals actually start to do this, and because that's not my party, and I don't want to give them too many ideas. But here are some ideas that I have. I suspect that the next political strategy is to take out the front bench of the Conservative Party. I won't be surprised if the imagery shifts from to include a peer and insert a CPC member of Parliament. Then after November 5th, depending on the results of the American election, there will potentially be that imagery of a Conservative and Republican leader in an attempt to paint them as the same. And the reason I say this is because Pierre Poilievre has built a strong brand around himself. And now the Liberals can try their luck in isolating members of the caucus or new candidates. Additionally, though, I suspect the Liberals don't run a campaign centered around their leader like the Conservatives will. It's Pierre Bonanza of everything, right? Their communications shop has realized that they're going to get more bang for their buck promoting issues and positive headlines rather than their current leader.
Okay. I want to run something by you because I heard this and I was like, oh, that's new material. I haven't heard that before from a Liberal MP. So this is Adam Van Couverden, GTA area. Milton, I believe, is his riding.
That's right.
If you have to picture, he's walking to Parliament Hill. He's going to the caucus meeting. This is from yesterday. And, of course, the press gallery members, they all want to get the clip, because of all the turmoil. And they're going into the caucus meeting. What's going to happen in the caucus meeting? This is what Adam Van Couverden said about the threat that Pierre Poilievre poses. Roll that.
What I'm focused on is my constituents. I'm focused on is beating Pierre Poilievre in the next federal election. He poses an existential threat to Canada's democracy, in my view. He also has committed to tearing down some of the institutions that Canadians rely on.
Okay. Can you play that one more time, just so
what I'm focused on is my constituents. I'm focused on is beating Pierre Poilievre in the next federal election. He poses an existential threat to Canada's democracy, in my view. He also has committed to tearing down some of the institutions that Canadians rely on.
Pierre Poilievre poses an existential threat to democracy. An existential threat to democracy. If we elect Pierre Poilievre, if Canadians elect Pierre Poilievre, no more democracy. It will cease to exist. I mean, that's totally imported from from the United States. I mean, that's a Democratic line in the U.S. presidential election campaign. You expect to hear more of that, for example, Ashton?
I do. I'd also be curious on his readout the morning after the election when he loses Milton by a couple of thousand votes, because that's the way that's going to go. We've seen the parallels linking Canadian Conservatives to Donald Trump, the Republican Party, before. I think it's a little bit stale. Obviously, they could get some wind in their sails after next Tuesday night. Who knows what's going to happen there, but here's the reality for Pierre Poilievre's electoral record. He's won every election that he's been in since 2004 and won the leadership, a Democratic leadership that people actually have to vote and pay for memberships in, with 71% of the vote. So, any inclination that Pierre Poilievre has undemocratic tendencies is bafflegab beyond reasonable expectation, and I think they're just going to try to throw everything they can at the window to see what sticks. I don't buy it for this one, and I wish the good member of Parliament luck in his next election.
Yeah, I mean, they are importing these hot-button issues, threat to democracy. Yara Sachs, for example, tweeted a couple of days ago, 2 days ago on Tuesday, without a doubt, the leader of the Conservatives will use the notwithstanding clause to take away women's reproductive rights. Without a doubt, she tweeted, we'll use the notwithstanding clause to take away women's reproductive rights. Actions speak louder than words, she said. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they're throwing out there. Allie, what do you think?
Well, to Ashton's point, this isn't surprising at all. What I found most interesting about the clip that was heard was that it was an I rather than a we. All of these Liberal members of Parliament aren't even necessarily claiming their party anymore because they're so embarrassed and realize that the branding of the Liberal Party of Canada is not doing so well right now, and so it's each for themselves in this next election, trying to hold on to their own seats. So they'll say anything.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
on News Radio.
Back with our Newsday panelists today, Allie Blades, Frame Point Public Affairs, Ashton Arsenault, Crestview Strategy, partner there. Mr. Trudeau, facing turmoil within his own party. Stephen Harper led the Conservative Party in 5 general elections. He won 3 of them, 06, 08, 2011. Lost 2 of them, 04 and 2015. He had the 2 minorities and the 1 majority government in 2011. Never seemed to face, though, the same sort of internal turmoil that Trudeau has had to deal with. Even when I think about 2015, that last campaign, there was nothing like this. I don't think. Not that I recall. I stand to be corrected. But why do you think that is, Ashton?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of really clear points we can make here, and I've long said that in politics, winning takes care of everything. But in the situation that you're referring to, the reality is a little bit more nuanced. So if you look at the polls, the Liberals know that they're going to lose. They know it. So people are getting uncomfortable, and they're speaking out. I happen to think self-preservation is the culprit. Now, look at the Harper scenario. Very, very different. And I'll point to 2 things. Canadian Conservatives learned some very hard lessons in the 90s, and even before that. When they're divided, they lose. It's really that simple. And for me, the big differentiator between the upcoming election and the 2015 election, for example, is that in 2015, the Conservative Party had a fighting chance to win.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, it didn't pan out, but heading into that election, there were, it was essentially a 3-way race.
Yeah.
And so that party was very, very competitive, and they came back as a pretty strong opposition, honestly.
Yeah.
Today's Liberals are not competitive, and they're actually looking at catastrophic losses. That does not make for a happy cause.
Okay. So winning solves a lot of problems.
Almost everything.
Or not badly losing, I guess, even. Right?
It helps. It goes a long way.
Yeah, if you think, I think back to 2015, I mean, even with a couple of weeks to go, there was a really good shot. And then that kind of what I call the anti-Harper universe kind of, I would say, finally settled on who they wanted the agents of change to be. And they chose the Liberals over the Democrats. And that was kind of all she wrote. How do you see it, Allie? Why did Harper never face the same sort of internal turmoil that Trudeau's dealing with right now?
Well, the playbook are two wildly different approaches. Okay. Stephen Harper wasn't a leader that lived for the applause. He was a heads down, get the work done prime minister. He will forever have a credible record in domestic and foreign affairs, and he brought taxes down as he promised. In reverse, Trudeau relied on his popularity first and foremost, relying on others in his cabinet to actually get the work done while he was out shaking hands and kissing babies. So when the popularity runs dry, he doesn't have that impactful legacy to stand on, i.e., you may not like the leader, but at least life isn't as bad as it is right now under Justin Trudeau. What was really funny and kind of looking back at some of this, the Stephen Harper days, and particularly that 2015 election, the NDP ran an ad asking Canadians had they had enough yet. And I'm like thinking to myself, maybe they should bring that back, but focus that towards the Liberal leader.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, look, when we come back, I've been thinking a lot about this U.S. presidential election. There's been a lot of twists and turns. I think one of the kind of the interesting twists in the final weeks was the decision by the owner of the Washington Post, a guy named Jeff Bezos, second wealthiest individual, not to have that newspaper run an endorsement for either candidate. I mean, the Post is a pretty liberal newspaper, and I think was widely expected to endorse Kamala Harris. And the owner of the newspaper said, no, we're not going to endorse anybody. Newspaper endorsements don't work. I want to ask our panelists when we come back, do newspaper endorsements matter? Do any endorsements matter? What about celebrity endorsements? What about Donald Trump having Elon Musk help him out, or Beyonce at a Kamala Harris rally, or Bruce Springsteen at a Kamala Harris rally? What about influencers? Are people influenced by influencers when it comes to politics? That's next. It's our Newsday panel on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now you know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
Newsday panel, Ali Blades with Frame Point Public Affairs. Ali's in British Columbia. Have they found a speaker yet? Now that the NDP's won the election out there, they're trying to lure a conservative over there to become the speaker?
No, but it's been a funny Twitter interaction of now conservative MLA saying, no, I'm not doing it. Trust me, I'm not doing it. So it's been kind of fun to see that unfold.
Yeah. And Ashton is, you're in Ottawa, Ashton, today?
I'm in Ottawa.
Yeah. Ashton's getting ready to making big plans for his $200 check that he's going to get next year from Doug Ford ahead of the Ontario election. Just
Dougie Bucks.
Dougie Bucks. Don't spend it all in one place, Ashton Arsenault. Let me ask you this. So, look, I mean, the Washington Post, after it was revealed that Jeff Bezos had put the kibosh on the Washington Post endorsing anyone for U.S. president, the Washington Post lost 250,000 subscribers. So I guess in that way it mattered, although Jeff Bezos had a column in the National Post in the Washington Post, an op-ed he said newspaper endorsements don't matter. Nobody ever voted one way or another based on what a newspaper told them to do. Ali, do you think newspaper endorsements matter in politics anymore? Or did they ever?
No, not so much. And here's the reason why. I think a lot of people follow the journalist and realize through their various writings that their political leanings. And so it's not as it was before, where the news was just the news and sharing the facts. Now there's sometimes some political leaning, political spin unfold in these articles. And so you're essentially capturing a market that already exists in your audience of a political leaning with these newspaper endorsements, much different to what I think we're going to talk about here of other types of endorsements. So, no, I don't think it matters as much, to answer the question.
Okay. Ashton?
Yeah, for whatever reason, I've never really been a huge fan of newspaper or even celebrity endorsements. Like, they seem hollow and self-serving. It makes me question who would be swayed by such a thing. And like, I guess it's a nice to have, right?
Right.
So using American examples, look, if Taylor Swift wants me to vote Democrat and let's say Clint Eastwood wants me to vote Republican, do I let that make up my mind? I would hope not. It is in vogue. You've mentioned the Washington Post. I think the LA Times did the same thing,
That's right,
actually.
Yes. Yeah.
But I will offer one counterpoint. Not all endorsements are useless, particularly in the Canadian context, for example, during nomination races. If you have caucus members lining up behind candidates, that can make a really big impact. But yeah,
Okay.
Newspapers, celebrities, not so much.
What about celebrities, Allie, or influencers?
Well, this is where it gets interesting because the influencer space is new to the political scene, and it's all about the audience. And so, yeah, sure, maybe we don't want the only thing that you think about in politics to be Taylor Swift saying, please vote X. But she comes with a massive audience of people who wouldn't be plugged into the day-to-day of the political scene. And so with these celebrities and influence endorsers, they're untapping a different audience. And then with influencers, when we talk about, do we even trust this person? These are people who have built their audiences based on letting them into their lives in every aspect. So reasonably, you do fall for trusting them a little bit more because you follow them every day. You know what they eat, you know where they shop, and all of those other things. So it's all about this new audience that you get.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rob.
Speak soon. Bye-bye. Ashton Arsenault is a partner at Crestview Strategy. From Frame Point out in Vancouver today, Allie Blades. The Talkback coming up right after the news. This is News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. And we have a couple of topics for you to consider today, to think about, and offer an opinion. At 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. First, Alberta and Ottawa. Or Alberta versus Ottawa. We want to know, do you think the Trudeau government is being unfair to Alberta? Or to the government of Alberta, to the people of Alberta? Do you think the Trudeau government, the federal government, is unfairly picking on Alberta? Picking on Alberta and favoring other parts of the country or other provinces. What would be your opinion on that? That's topic number one. Topic number two. Do you think buying a house is still a good way to build wealth? Do you think buying a house is still a good way to build wealth? Or, given the state of the housing market right now, higher prices, higher interest rates, buying a house is not as good an investment as it used to be? What would you say? I bring that up because there was some news on that front by way of some new data from Statistics Canada. I'd like to run that down for you and ask you what you think. 1-833-668-2577. So on the first topic, Alberta versus Ottawa, I think it is fair to say the feeling of the current government in Alberta under Premier Danielle Smith is that the Trudeau government is hostile to Alberta. Not just picking on Alberta, but is hostile to Alberta. That the Trudeau government is favoring other parts of the country over Alberta, maybe even at the expense of Alberta. The feeling in Ottawa, among Liberals, this is my own impression, is that Alberta just doesn't get it. It doesn't get that the world is changing, climate change is a big threat, and the oil and gas sector in Alberta has to accept this reality or Alberta is going to be left behind. I think when you listen really closely to what Liberals in Ottawa say, that's what they say. And it's our job, it's the federal government's job to drag Alberta into this new reality, even if we have to do it kicking and screaming. So I would like to know, where do you think the truth lies between those two opinions? Who's in the right here? Is it Alberta? Is it Ottawa? All opinions are welcome. Have your say. We'll hear you out. And on the second topic of home ownership, is it still a good way to build wealth? What would you say? I bring this up because a recent report from StatsCan, report came out on Tuesday, indicates that Canadians who own homes, compared to Canadians who rent, are much better off financially. And I mean much better off. It's called the Survey of Financial Security, and it says, first of all, it says the median net worth in Canada, in other words, right in the middle, the median net worth in Canada is now just shy of $520,000. $520,000. But for older families between the ages of 55 and 64, if they own their own principal residence, the median net worth is $914,000, almost $1 million, $914,000. That older family, again, between the ages of 55 and 64, if they own their principal residence and they have an employee-sponsored pension plan, well, they're the best off of all. Median net worth, $1.4 million. $1.4 million. Whereas those who have a pension plan but don't own a personal residence, they have a median net worth of about $360,000. And for people who rent and do not have a pension plan, the median net worth, just $11,900, not even $12,000. Pension plan, own your own house, $1.4 million. No pension plan and rent, not even $12,000. So it's quite a difference, isn't it? A big difference between renters and homeowners, big difference between people who have pension plans, those who don't have pension plans. It's the real estate angle that we really want to focus on today. Because real estate, let's face it, Canadians are real estate obsessed now. Home prices, interest rates, mortgage rates, all of it. It's top of mind for a lot of people right now. Housing affordability. This report would suggest, and I mean it's StatsCan data after all, would seem to suggest that still one of the best ways for Canadians to build wealth is to be a homeowner instead of a renter. And again, what we want to know is, given what's happened in recent years with the housing market, higher prices, housing insanity for a few years, higher interest rates, so long 2% mortgage rate, welcome to 5%, 6%. So is that still the case? Does that still apply? Is it still that way? Will it be that way for some time to come? Will it be that way forever? Or will higher interest rates, higher home prices affect this in any way? The ability of Canadians to build wealth through housing. Please share your thoughts on both of these issues. I think there's a lot to think about there. Interesting topics. One is basically federalism, national unity. And is the federal government favoring some parts of the country over other parts of the country? In this case, is Alberta getting a raw deal from Ottawa? Is Alberta getting a raw deal from Ottawa? And I guess with housing, I guess one way to distill it down is to ask you, is housing, even with higher prices, higher interest rates, is housing still a good way, even the best way for Canadians to build wealth? Or has that changed now? Phone lines open. We encourage you to take part in the conversation today. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. I'm Rob Snow. It's Talk Back. Let's get this going. This is News Radio.
Got something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Ottawa versus Alberta, that's one topic. Housing is another. Is Alberta getting a raw deal from Ottawa? Are the Trudeau Liberals picking on Alberta? Being unfair to Alberta? Or is Alberta just complaining too much? What would you say? 1-833-668-2577. And given the high cost of housing, higher interest rates, is buying a house still a good way, maybe even the best way for Canadians to build wealth? What would you say? Want to know your opinions? Talk back. Those are our topics today. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. Robert in Calgary. Hi there, Robert.
Hi, how's it going?
It goes, sir. With or without me, it always goes. How are you? You're good?
I'm doing good.
That's
but
good.
I take exception to the use of that StatsCan statistic on wealth due to home ownership.
You do? Okay.
It doesn't take into account the actual issues. It's only a statistic of, it's true, people with houses have more money. I have no disagreement with the statistic.
Right. Well, it's net worth. Net worth. Right.
Well, net worth and have more money, they're essentially the same thing.
Okay.
Now, the problem is it doesn't indicate where the wealth comes from. It's suggesting it comes from home ownership. So if you're a person who's reasonably well off, you have extra income, you can invest, and you can afford to buy a house, yes, you become that upper income or that upper net worth person. If you're a family with minimal income, doesn't have disposable income at the end, can't afford to invest, and cannot buy a house, then you're in the lower end. But nothing in there says owning the house created the wealth. Owning the house came as an outcome of the wealth. It did not create the wealth.
Oh, I see. Okay. But what about the appreciation in the asset value? Didn't that create some of the wealth?
It may, but again, if you are in a lower income and cannot buy the house in the first place,
right.
In other words, you can't invest in a house,
okay,
then you are not going to get there. The ownership or lack of the ownership of the house, again, that comes out of having the available income.
Right.
And if you don't have it, you can't get there. So the house itself is not the vehicle. The house itself is the outcome of your situation.
Okay.
And there's very little many people can do about it. Now, I am part of that upper end. I own a house.
Okay.
But I ran a business.
Right.
I never bought a house. I put my money and my efforts into my business until I was, I would have been 64. Then I started taking my money out of the business and I bought a house.
When you were 64?
Years later, I sold my business and I became mortgage free.
Wow. Okay.
And I created for my situation, far better situation, by not owning a house.
Wow.
I rented.
Interesting.
And then I used the assets created by running my business to buy a house for retirement.
Oh,
but I
very
never
interesting.
used a house as a means of gaining wealth.
Okay. Do you think it's a good way to build wealth?
I don't.
You don't? Okay.
I'm one of the people...
Very contrarian. I think that would be a contrarian opinion, Robert. Yeah.
No, again, it's a good way to force savings and have some wealth.
Okay.
But I can tell you, I've never had a situation. I rented from my 20s to my mid-60s. So I bought a house for retirement out of my business asset.
Yes.
I never had a situation where it was cheaper to own a house than it was to rent. And that essentially, especially if you're paying a mortgage, because even today, if you're paying $2,200 to rent an apartment in Calgary, which is not a great apartment, but it's adequate, what house can you own and buy for $2,200 a month? And I'm including, all right, you've got utilities.
I don't know.
You've got all the expenses.
I'll ask our friends in Calgary who are listening right now. A mortgage payment of $2,200. I don't know what kind of house you can get.
Not
Calgary.
a mortgage, yeah, because you could rent something for about $2,200. You can get something cheaper, but $2,200 is the entry point for something decent now.
Okay, all right.
But you can't pay them. When I bought my house, I did take a mortgage. All right, and this was 5 years ago. My mortgage payments were $1,500 a month. My utilities averaged $300 a month. We were at $1,800. My taxes were running about $200 a month, so we're at $200. Upkeep and other things, you're talking another $200-300 a month on average. So we were at $2,300 a month 5 years ago, and at that point, I could rent something for $1,500-1,600.
Okay,
that's changed now.
Right.
But so have mortgages.
Okay, Robert, we got to run. Very interesting, though.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you for calling. So Robert took a different path to creating wealth. That's interesting. That's one of our topics today: building wealth through housing. Still a good thing, or has the nature of the housing market changed? It's just a question I have. I don't really know the answer. I'd love to ask that to our listeners today. That's why we're doing the show. And Ottawa-Alberta relations not going so well. Is that because the Trudeau Liberals are picking on Ottawa? What would you say? 1-833-668-2577. More of your calls coming up. Talk back here on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Ottawa versus Alberta. That's one topic. Housing, another topic. Kevin in Calgary. Hi, Kevin.
Rob, thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I have questions. I don't have opinions because I don't think I'm educated enough to form an opinion.
Oh, sure you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I believe that Quebec is a resource-rich province.
Sure.
Yet they receive a lot of compensation payments from the rest of the country. And in Alberta, we don't like that. That's been well known.
Oh, yes.
So my perception is, and I'm not fully knowledgeable of whether or not we are getting ripped off or not. It sounds like we are.
Okay.
And it sounds like Quebec gets too much. But maybe someone in your audience can enlighten me and direct me to some facts, some websites where I can get real information, because you know how it is out there between the perception and the regurgitating of the false information.
Well, if you just want to take equalization, okay, the equalization program, I think there are exactly 3.7 people in the country who understand how that program works, and I'm not
alone.
I'm not going to say I'm one of them, but I can tell you what the numbers say. Going back all the way back, if you go back to 2015, 2016, equalization, money from the federal government doled out to the provinces, okay? Your province, Alberta, has received nothing in almost 10 years. Quebec has received $120 billion over that same time.
So those are facts.
Facts. Absolute facts right from the government.
Yeah.
Sir. Right? Seem fair?
I don't know how come they would receive so much, because I thought they were a resource-rich province. I thought they were.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know why either. I look at say the province of Quebec has the lowest childcare rates in the country. It has the lowest tuition rates in the country. It has the lowest electricity rates in the country. It has a massive hydroelectricity utility that exports massive amounts of electricity to the United States.
Exactly.
And those electricity exports are not calculated the same way oil and gas exports are calculated, say, when Alberta sells its oil to the United States. Right?
Okay, so it's not calculated.
Not calculated, not taken into the formula the same way. Quebec even has a lower unemployment rate than Alberta, and yet for some reason Quebec is considered a have-not province, and you guys in the West you're the haves, and you've got to share with the less prosperous have-nots. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Has anybody or a prominence ever tried to explain what a potential realignment of these?
Well, that's one thing that Premier Smith is pushing for right now. Let's talk about this. Yeah. How can this possibly be?
So my perception is not too far off.
Well, maybe not. Kevin, thank you for calling.
Excellent.
Yeah, good to hear from you. 1-833-668-2577, 1-833-668-2577. Zul, thanks for calling, Zul. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Thanks for Rob. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I've called you a few times.
Okay.
Really appreciate your show.
Appreciate that.
So, for my perspective, and I really hope I'm wrong for my child's sake.
Okay.
Yes, at one time, buying a house, the rate of return was amazing. I built my house in 2006 in Alberta, in Calgary, and I sold it this year, and I made a very tidy profit.
That's good for you.
But at these rates, if my son buys a house today or is able to buy a house today, I don't think first and foremost he can afford it without the bank of that.
All right. So just hang on. I'll bring you back on. Okay, we have to stop here. Just hold on. I'll bring you back on right after the news. Talk back. 1-833-668-2577. Weigh in on either of our topics. Love to hear your opinions, please. It's News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Talking about how things are going right now, because they're not going very well, in my opinion, between the federal government in Ottawa and the government in Alberta. That's one of the topics that we want to talk about. Is Alberta getting a raw deal from the Liberals in Ottawa? Are the Trudeau Liberals picking on Alberta, being unfair to Alberta? Is Alberta just complaining too much? Making Justin Trudeau to be the bad guy because it's helpful for the government of Alberta just politically. That's one opinion that's out there. And we're also talking about housing and what you see ahead for housing. High cost of housing, higher interest rates. Is buying a house still a good way to build wealth? What's your opinion here? 1-833-668-2577. We're going to go back to Zul. So, Zul, you sold a house, right? You did very well.
Yes.
Yeah. So good for you, definitely. First of all. But you don't think that your children are going to do as well. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think so, because the prices are inflated right now. They're just out of control as far as cost of housing is concerned. So that's going to be a problem. Interest rates might be getting a little bit better, so that might help out a little bit. But I believe the pricing of housing in Canada overall is inflated. And I don't think they will. First and foremost, getting in the housing market will be tough for them. So that's my opinion, and then we leave it at that. As far as Alberta being picked on, absolutely. Quebec brings a lot more seats to Liberals. We don't, but that's still not fair. We should be treated same as everybody else, but we are not. And proof in the pudding is what you pointed out to the last caller, is the amount of equalization payment going to Quebec to coming to us since 2015.
Yeah.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's a difference of $120 billion. Yeah. It's a difference of
Exactly.
Imagine what you could do with, say, healthcare in Alberta with $120 billion.
Housing in Alberta, exactly. Yeah. And the worst thing, and I'm hoping Mr. Poilievre, when he does come in the next year, and hopefully before, will really address that issue and look into it, and something is done about it, for sure.
All right. Thank you. Good to hear from you, Zul.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Take care.
1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. To Eric in Cole Harbour. Hi, Eric.
Hey, weather's beautiful here, just like in Ottawa.
Well, David was just telling me today we've hit record warmth in Ottawa for Halloween. A record-breaking temperature, 22-point-something degrees. What is it,
22.6.
22.6.
Count it.
Yeah, we're pretty close to that. And it's typical weather for November, isn't it? What? Yeah.
Well, our friends in Calgary today,
no kidding.
In Calgary today, right now it's +2 in Calgary. Plus 2.
Anyways, what I talk about is home ownership there.
Yeah.
And I think that if people were allowed to purchase homes at a reasonable rate, it's a perfect way of accumulating wealth. And like John Locke said, and also St. Thomas Aquinas, if you can't own property, you don't have personal freedom. And it's pretty hard today for a lot of people to be able to buy a house. I'll give you an example now. I built my house in 1995, cost $135,000. 10 years after that, it was up to $300,000, and I sold it just after I retired. And the people that bought it from me, they sold it for almost $600,000.
Wow!
So
holy smokes! From 135 to 600,000 in say how many years would you say?
17 years.
In 17
No, pardon
years.
me, 20 years.
20 years. Okay. Wow.
No, it was a nice house. I mean, I did a lot to it.
Sure.
Fireplaces, all that, hardwood floor, all that kind of stuff, ceramic tiles everywhere and all that. But it just goes to show that an average person making, a half-decent wage with property can really accumulate wealth.
Right.
And if you
but
don't,
what about the state of things right now, where you see in Halifax, like what's the starter home going for in Halifax now? $500,000, $600,000, something like that, and with a say a 5 or 6% interest rate.
I think so. Yeah, I think you're not.
So is it still a good way to build wealth?
Yeah. Well, you know what? If I don't know how much longer this is. These expensive homes are going to be.
Okay.
But I really believe that if you can do it, it's still a worthwhile investment.
Okay. Very interesting, Eric. Thank you. Yep. Good to hear from you. Happy Halloween to you. Bye-bye. To Jane is calling from Alberta. Good to hear from you, Jane. Hi there.
Hi. How are you?
I'm just great, Jane. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well.
That's good.
I wanted to weigh in on your topic of gaining equity and, gaining wealth through real estate.
Yes.
I do think that there is definitely benefits to owning a real estate property. And I also don't entirely disagree with your previous caller who spent, his adult life building his business. I think the bottom line is that you kind of have to have a little bit of money to get started either way.
Okay.
And what's happening is we've got all these young adults who are flying up north and they're working and they're doing, week out, week in.
Yes. I know a lot of people who did that. Yep.
A lot of people will do that. And, they are making good money.
Very good money.
Good money. And a lot of them are younger. So
they're working hard for it, too.
At home with mom and dad.
Yeah.
And then what happens is they have all this money and they turn around and they buy $90,000 vehicles. And vehicles are money pits. You lose money on vehicles unless you have classic cars and all that.
Right.
So I think it's more educating the young people that if they want to have a comfortable life and retirement, they need to put their money where it's going to be made, where it's either real estate or, put everything into a business. You can't depend on investments because you will lose it as easily as you made it.
Okay.
As a general kind of rule, my opinion.
All right.
And I do think that real estate is possible, but the government's making it very hard. If there's a house in a family that wants to be passed down, the capital gains that they're going to have to pay will almost make it not worth inheriting that place. They're going to force everybody to be moving out to the smaller communities on the outskirts of big cities because the property value is better prices, bigger lots for less money.
Okay. Very good points, Jane. Thank you. Great to hear from you. Yep. Bye-bye. Okay, we have to stop here. Deborah, you hang on the line. Rick in Dartmouth, we'll get to your calls as we make our way through Talkback today, Thursday edition, here on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Talking about home ownership today. We're talking about federalism today, the exciting topic of national unity. Alberta's strained relationship with the federal Liberals. Lots of people want to talk about the housing market. That's usually the case. Let's go to Deborah. Hi, Deborah.
Hello.
Hi.
I was calling in because I'm hearing what everyone is saying about how the prices are outrageous, and it's difficult for new homeowners to get into the market.
Yes.
But yes, and I agree with all of that. But my question is, how can you build wealth with real estate if prices don't go up? It seems that we're in a catch-22 here.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, clearly in the past, the StatsCan data says people who have owned their own home have done a lot better than people who haven't. Like, it's totally obvious. The difference between someone who rents their whole life and someone who owns their home over their lives, by the time they hit their 50s, 60s, it's almost $1 million in net worth difference. Okay?
Yes.
I'm wondering, is that a thing of the past now because of the high cost of homes now and the higher interest rates now?
Yes, it seems to be.
You think it's a thing of the past now? It's not going to be the same as it was.
I do, because how else can you build wealth in real estate if the prices don't go up? So if we're buying homes at $1 million now, how much more can they go up? And how can you build equity in something like that, other than paying it off, of course, and owning it? But $1 million, 10, 20 years from now, how much is that going to be worth? So it seems that we created this building wealth with real estate only to find that we've hit the ceiling.
You think we've hit the ceiling? See, that's...
I think so.
That's one of the things I was wondering. Okay. Very interesting, Deborah. Very good. Thank you for weighing in on that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I'm approaching this stuff. I'm not saying I have the answer. It's just something I want to run by you. Given the high cost of housing, given the higher interest rates, is buying a home still a good way for Canadians to build wealth? Or has that changed because of costs and interest rates? I mean, as I mentioned at the outset, this new set of data points from StatsCan suggests owning a house is a lot better than not owning a house. And I could go through those numbers again, but let's go to Rick in Dartmouth. Hi, Rick.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, Rick. Thanks.
Hey, great to hear Eric calling in from Halifax, Dartmouth area as well.
Yes.
Look, as far as Alberta is concerned, I stand with Alberta.
You do? Okay.
I remember Trudeau Sr. and his shenanigans regarding Alberta.
Okay.
And some of that rubbed off on his son. That's all I want to say about that.
Okay.
As far as building wealth through real estate, it goes in cycles. We bought a house in 1982 for $40,000. Today, you probably could get $500 for it here in Dartmouth. It's in the center of the city. It's old stock, literally from the 1800s.
Right.
But it's been maintained.
Big place or?
It's not big. No, it's a rental unit just over and under, and we live next door in a little bigger house, and we have pretty big lots for being in the center of a tree with lots of center of the city with lots of big trees and stuff like that. But when we bought them, interest rates were on their way down at 12.5% for a first mortgage.
12.5.
And I did some.
Wow.
I did some research in terms of the inflation calculator, and if we bought that house for $40,000 in 1982, today it would be about $140,000. Okay, which is well under the $500,000 we could probably get for it.
Right.
Okay? Right. But there's a second part to that equation is if you don't sell it, you don't You know, I mean, if you keep it until you die, somebody else gets it, right? You know, your kids or whatever.
Yes.
So if you really like where you're living and you don't want to sell it, it doesn't matter if it was worth $2 million. You know, in terms of that. So, but the cycles, what I'm interested in talking about.
Yeah.
That.
Where do you think we are in that cycle right now?
We're in a wicked upswing in the last post-pandemic era.
Okay.
And so
you think it's peaked and now it's coming down, or do you still think it has some way to run, or what?
I think it's leveling out. Okay, and then
leveling out. Okay.
If you bought a house today for $500,000, there's probably going to be 10 years where nothing's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
But somewhere down the road, it probably, if you waited, 30, 20 years, whatever, it's probably going to be worth $1 million. So I suggest that the person who told me that the best investment you could make was real estate. My wife and I, we saved our money. We had a $20,000 down payment on a $40,000 house back in '82.
That must have been like a princely sum back in those days, Rick.
Well, it was. Like we were both working hard at the time, and we saved our money. Didn't have any kids at that time, so that's the decision you have to make. I suggest that now it's more difficult. There's no doubt about it. But when you look at it, the people who buy now in 10 or 15 or 20 years might be sitting pretty, like people like us. So.
Okay, Rick. Thank you. Good to hear from you. Great call. Thank you, as always, Rick in Dartmouth. I'm Rob Snow. More of your calls just ahead. If you're on the line, you'll be on the air before the top of the hour. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
A lot of people want to talk about housing today. That's one of our topics. We can also talk about Alberta and its relationship with the Trudeau Liberals in Ottawa if you want. I have a lot to say about that, actually. Ron in Sylvan Lake, Alberta. Thank you for calling, Ron. Hi there.
Hello. Yes, Rod English. It's actually Rod, first-time caller.
I appreciate that, Rod.
Yeah.
thank you.
Listen to your show all the time.
I do. Okay.
But I'd like to address one thing on the housing.
Yes.
And that is I have never heard, and this is from, and I am a strong conservative, I might add, is I have never heard any government address the fact that for housing, why don't they let us write the interest off on our mortgages like in the U.S.? That is one way of giving people money to buy homes, and they get enough money off houses, off GST, the taxes from us contractors, you name it, eh?
Okay.
And that. But that's a direct...
I've asked if you're a frequent listener, and I'm not sure if you listen all the time, Professor Lee, I asked him about that, and he said it's kind of a trade-off. You don't, if you sell your home, you make a lot of money. Like one of our callers did. Zool said he, did pretty well when he sold his house. He doesn't pay a capital gains on that. Right, on a primary residence. That's not the case in the United States. You do.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right. Drop the capital gains on your first house if you're an entry person, and that. I mean, we write the interest. Us contractors get to write off the interest when we're building them.
Okay. Right.
And yes, we pay the capital gains if it's there eventually.
Yeah, but you don't really
give them a break.
But do you really think it would be? I don't think it'd be a very winning issue if you wanted to have homeowners basically in the streets in front of Parliament Hill. It would put the Freedom Convoy to shame. I'll tell you, put a capital gains tax on primary residences.
Absolutely, don't put a capital. I'm saying you don't get both. But right now,
there is no capital gains, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but just drop the interest, but don't take it up somewhere else.
Okay.
That seems to be government's attitude. Yeah, we'll give you this, but we'll take it over here. Eh?
Right. Okay.
And that. But if they're really interested in getting some of these younger couples and whatever into the market and that, just give them that.
Okay. And let them deduct the interest from the income tax, right? Yeah.
And all these incredibly convoluted schemes.
Some people, someday I'm going to have to do an interview on the difference between U.S. mortgages and Canadian mortgages and how they work, because another attractive thing that a lot of people like about the U.S. system is you can sign up for 30 years, get a 30-year mortgage, and you never have to renew. Some people find that an attractive situation as well. But that's a conversation for another day, Rod. We'll pick it up right after the news with hour number 2 of Talkback here on News Radio.
It's time to talk back
on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
and have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
2 topics there up for discussion. Housing is one of them. Given the high cost of housing, higher interest rates, is housing still a good way for Canadians to build wealth? That's one question we've been asking. I'm also very interested in the situation between Alberta and the Trudeau Liberals in Ottawa, and this idea the Trudeau Liberals are picking on Alberta or being unfair to Alberta. Alberta versus Ottawa. What would you say? What is it? To one of the previous callers' points, 1-833-668-2577, by the way. Whenever there's a Trudeau in power, there's always trouble between Ottawa and Alberta. Very clearly, there is not much love these days between these two. And it takes two to tango. Between the government of Alberta and the Trudeau government in Ottawa. They're fighting all the time. And the narrative from the Alberta government is that Ottawa's being unfair. And I just want to know, do you think it's true? And if you think it's true, give me some examples. Take, for example, one example would be this latest spat over this carbon tax carve-out. Premier Danielle Smith, and we spoke to her justice minister a couple of hours ago. Premier Danielle Smith is going to ask the federal court to have a look at this carbon tax carve-out. This exemption from paying the carbon tax if you use furnace oil to heat your home. Premier Smith says it's not fair. What about the people in Alberta who use natural gas to heat their homes? Now, you think about that. To the listeners in Calgary, if you heat with natural gas, how much carbon tax was on your last natural gas bill? Or if you use propane to heat your home, you're not getting a break on the carbon tax, but people who use furnace oil, much dirtier fuel, they're getting a break on the carbon tax. And let's face it, it is people in Atlantic Canada who are most likely to use home heating oil to heat their homes. And it's her accusation. I just happen to believe it. And so does everyone else who has their head screwed on straight, by the way, that this carve-out was offered to people in Atlantic Canada because they turned on the Trudeau Liberals after they had to start paying the carbon tax. Liberal polling numbers started sinking like an anchor just weeks after they started paying the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. And the Liberals really need those seats. Atlantic Canada is very important for the Liberals, has been a stronghold for the Liberals. And they were seeing in the polling numbers riding after riding after riding, just slipping away because of this carbon tax. And they had to do something, and this is what they did. Okay. If you live in Halifax or St. John or Fredericton or Charlottetown or Summerside, if you use heating oil to heat your home, and a lot of you do, you don't have to pay the carbon tax for the next 3 years. And we'll give you big money if you want to switch to a heat pump. And we'll up the rural top-up on the carbon tax rebate. It's just like one announcement after another. Now, it hasn't helped lift the Liberal polling numbers in Atlantic Canada, but what it did do was it sure made other people in other parts of the country upset. Like in Alberta, what about us? Where's our break on the carbon tax? Why do they get a break and we don't? And I thought this was about fighting climate change. We use natural gas. That's better than furnace oil. Where's our carve-out? And it certainly didn't help after a Liberal MP said the quiet part out loud and suggested that the reason Atlantic Canadians were getting a break is because they vote for the Liberals. And people in Alberta didn't. That just confirmed everyone's suspicions. That it's not really about fighting climate change at all, this carbon tax. It's about votes. So, I mean, the Premier of Alberta says that's not fair, and we're going to ask the federal court to look at this. And I guess Alberta might want one of two things. You either get rid of the carbon tax altogether, or you get the people of Alberta use fossil fuels to heat their homes. The same kind of break on the carbon tax that people on the East Coast are getting. You know, fairness and federalism. I think that's a summation of Alberta's position on that issue. Do you think Alberta has a point there? 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577 if you want to weigh in on that. Or home ownership, that's our other issue. Adam in Calgary wants to weigh in on that. Hi, Adam.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
It's actually really concerning how unaware older people are towards how expensive cost of living is here in Alberta.
Okay.
And particularly what stood out to me is one of the ladies that called earlier said, you know, a lot of these guys work and they buy an $80,000 car. But let's break it out here. So let's say right out of school, on the higher end, something like, you know, an architect or something like that, an engineer, you're looking at around $70,000. You're going to be about post-tax $4,000 a month. Rent in Calgary is about $1,500. You're looking at monthly for food, about $600 on the cheap end again. $350 for utilities, internet, cell phone. Gas is about $400 a month for your vehicle in order to get back and forth, seeing as how expensive it is these days. Insurance, because you're young, you also have to pay about $300 in order to get
insurance
coverage.
Is crazy. Yeah,
exactly. So when you add that all up, you're looking at about $850 left behind after everything.
After everything, you got about $800 to play with. You're saying
exactly, and there's nothing else. That's assuming you don't need clothes, you don't have student debt, you don't. Your car doesn't suddenly break down. Nothing. And when you try to do, let's say, a bare minimum condo here in Calgary, about $200,000, it takes you 4 years to save up on that. Assuming nothing happens in those 4 years. I don't see how that's really realistic.
But I guess my point is, let's say you did all that and managed to do all that. Would that still be worth it as a way to build wealth?
Well, the thing is, the goalpost is constantly moving. So the house is not going to cost $200,000. The condo's not going to cost $200,000 by the time you save up for that 20% down payment that we're talking about. It's going to be more expensive, right? And then assuming you don't own a house by the time you get to retirement, your pension's not enough in order to keep you going for both rent and for living expenses.
Okay, but again, what I come back to is, let's say you move heaven and earth and you scrimp and save every penny. And as a young person, you get into that shoebox in the sky condo. Okay? Is it still worth it? That you could live there, say, 5 years, build up some equity, make a little bit of money, move into a nicer place, do the thing over and over and over. Maybe you live there 5-10 years.
No, it isn't.
It's not. You think those days are over?
It's looking like...
Because of the high cost of housing, the interest rates, the high cost of living, everything? Is that what you're saying, Adam?
It's mounting and it's getting
mounting.
worse.
Okay. All right. Very good perspective. I thank you for your call. It's hour number 2 of Talkback. We're just underway. A couple of topics out there. We'd love to hear from you. 1-833-668-2577. I'm Rob Snow. It's News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Hello, Luke in Calgary wants to talk about the relationship right now between the Smith government in Alberta and the Trudeau government in Ottawa. Hi there, Luke.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Go ahead.
So at the top of the hour, you kind of you nailed it on the head with everything with the carbon tax. If basically everything you said was just said very eloquently and
thank you.
on.
Okay.
It is just that unfair, and it's undeniable that it's clearly unfair. But what I wanted to point out was I believe during the pandemic, Mr. Kenney went to Trudeau for $4 or $5 billion for our healthcare system. I think it was just before the pandemic. and Trudeau turned us down. That money was specifically for healthcare, for mental health, for drug addiction. The nurses hadn't had a contract in, I think, 3 or 4 years at that point. They still don't. Trudeau denied us the money, turned around and gave, I believe, $5 billion to Quebec to do whatever they saw fit. That's a clear example, I think, of screw Alberta. Here, you guys go over here. And I'd like to point out still, Ms. Smith doing everything she can for our healthcare sector, as she has been, especially on the mental health, the drug addiction, on that side of things.
Right.
And now they're having a hard time hashing out the contract with the nurses still because they don't have the money.
Yeah, I don't know if that's accurate. How much, say, Premier Kenney and his ask for healthcare was for Alberta versus, say, Premier Legault in Quebec or whatever. I know that all of the premiers really put up a united front, and that their claim is Ottawa's not paying its fair share when it comes to healthcare. It should be a 50-50 split, and Ottawa's not even close on that. And Absolutely. The federal government coughed up a little more money, but it wasn't nearly what the premiers had been looking for. Mr. Trudeau would come back and say, premiers wanting more money for healthcare. What else is new?
I know, but
right.
Regardless, we give a lot of money, and it goes everywhere else. And it seems to go everywhere else easier.
Okay.
It seems like there's a rubber stamp for other provinces, and we have to fight tooth and nail to get anything back from the government.
All right, Luke. Thank you. Good to hear from you. Yeah. And I would just point out, in the interest of fairness, the Liberals in Ottawa, this is what they're saying. Oh, there goes Danielle Smith again. And this is all she ever does. This is what the Nenshi people would say, too. All she ever wants to do is pick fights with Ottawa when she should be more focused on fixing healthcare, improving the education system. But instead, this is her MO. Make Justin Trudeau look like the bad guy, pick fights with Justin Trudeau. I found it very interesting that the Liberals in Ottawa, when they try to fire back on this issue of the carbon tax carve-out, they don't talk about the special treatment that people in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI are getting. What they instead talk about is the overall virtue of the carbon tax and how important it is to fight climate change and how much money people are getting back in rebates, $1,800 a year in the case of Alberta for a family of 4. They're trying to flip the script and actually make it all about the carbon tax itself. They completely ignore the carve-out that they gave to the Liberals, the Liberal base in Atlantic Canada. It's a total distraction and a diversion, their strategy on that. But on home ownership, very popular topic here. George in Guelph. Hello,
Hi.
George.
Hi there.
Or Georgie. Is it George or Georgie?
Georgie. It doesn't
Georgie.
matter.
Sorry, Georgie.
Well, I would just like to point out, first of all, I do think the caller is right. Alberta is getting a rough time.
Okay.
I'm old enough to, over the years, to have noticed the difference. And Alberta is screwed because once it was the breadbasket, getting lots of money in for its oil, and that was great. Now it's not. And it's votes that seem to count, not province.
Okay. Interesting point.
But on home ownership,
yes,
I cannot see how people can afford it anymore. I really can't.
Okay.
I'm 81 years old. We've been through home ownership. My husband and I, he passed away. But only if you are able to continue working can you afford home ownership. Once you get ill at an early age, you're screwed. We did get back into home ownership, but it was difficult, and it was not an equity anymore. It was not something that would provide for us in our retirement.
As you grew older, yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
And so, I think cost of living is impossible. I just don't know what the cutoff line is anymore for people who are under a certain level that just cannot foresee getting a mortgage.
Yes.
What yearly wage do you have to make in order to be able to afford all of the daily activities and bills and so on and so forth that you need?
Very good question.
Pretty impossible.
Yeah, very good question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Georgie, great to hear from you. Thank you for calling. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you're just joining us and you're wondering what the housing topic is today, we're just asking, look, the StatsCan numbers say if you own a home, you're going to do a lot better than if you rent throughout your life. You own a home and have a pension plan, well, you basically hit the jackpot. But some of the callers today so far have suggested, yeah, those days are over because of the high cost of housing. Generally, the high cost of living, the higher interest rate environment, it's harder to build wealth through housing now. What would you say? 1-833-668-2577. Talk back.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Let's get right back to the phones on our topics today. Home ownership, the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. Thomas is in Airdrie. Hello, Thomas.
Hello.
Hi,
How
Thomas.
are you?
I'm great, Thomas. Thank you.
Good. It's always been difficult to buy a house.
Okay.
The cost of living fluctuates up and down. Real estate fluctuates up and down. And sometimes when the prices are high, the cost of living is bad. But I remember my grandfather very well. Okay. I'm 80 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
My grandfather bought his first house in 1910. Right. He paid $600 for it.
Sure.
It was a beautiful 2.5-story double brick house. We sold it about 20 years ago, and we only got about $90,000 for it because my uncle lived there by himself and was sick for a long time. My dad bought his first house in 1943. He paid $2,600 for it.
$2,600
He lived in it for 50 years. Sold it for about $300,000.
Wow.
Myself, I've moved around a lot. And my habit has been buy high, sell low. So I've never really done well at real estate.
I see. You're on the Rob Snow real estate plan there, Thomas. Yeah, okay.
Well, okay. So anyways, I'm 80 years old, got a beautiful home. It's all paid for.
Good.
It took decades to get to this point. And with all the utilities and taxes, it's costed me $1,200 a month to live in this house. In Airdrie, you can't rent a one-bedroom, a basement apartment for $1,500 a month.
Yeah,
they're higher than that. So I'm stuck where I am and loving it.
Okay, yeah, good place to be stuck. Good to be stuck, I guess, yeah. Thomas. Yeah, I guess the case is being made, though, that it's tougher now. You say it's always been tough, but some people are making the case it's never been this tough. It's different now, Thomas.
My dad had two brothers.
Yeah.
And he was the only one in the family with a job. He quit school at 15 because he had a job. He made 6 cents an hour.
Sure.
He gave his check to his mother.
6 cents an hour. I get.
He fed the family.
I understand.
Paid the bills.
But he also bought a house for
mortgage.
$600.
Yeah,
right?
That was in 1910.
I know. So you're saying tough? You don't know tough, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you, Thomas. Be right back after the news. News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
On a home ownership, are the good times over for home ownership. Puma in Calgary. Hi there. Hi, Puma. I hear Puma. I hear someone driving in their car. I can hear the wind going by, but I do not hear the caller, so you'll have to call us back. Let's go to Mike in Calgary. Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Hi, Mike.
Rob, how are you doing?
As I told the previous 6 callers, Mike, I'm doing just fine.
Good. Hey, just wanted to comment a couple things there. The unfortunate situation with the real estate for young people, I think, is getting out of control. There's no question about it. I mean, IMF and, Statistics Canada and all these other stats they're showing the average price of a home in Canada relative to the average income in Canada has gotten so out of control. Some are saying it's between 10 times and 14 times. And depending on what website you're looking at, it makes us either the top or the second. I think Portugal, one site showed it as the second highest real estate prices relative to income in the world. And so at some point something has to break, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And
do you think it's breaking now, Mike?
I don't know if it's breaking. I think part of the stats too are a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Misleading, because you've got these centers in Toronto and Vancouver that are so out of control, that are really,
that maybe they skew the averages.
Size,
maybe they skew the averages. Okay.
Right, exactly. There's really skewing the averages. So that's a part of it. I think regionally here in Alberta, I think there is a good run for real estate for quite a while, just for many, many purposes. Many reasons, right? Young population, high average income, good economy, lots of things going for it. So I think regionally here, it's still a good investment. And then one caller alluded to the fact that, you can't trust, investing, because you're going to lose eventually. And I always say that that's misleading. People make a lot of money in real estate and they miscalculate how to make what a real return is, because they don't realize that you're taking a certain amount of money and you're leveraging a large asset. Well, if you do that in the stock market, and you calculate it the same way, you're going to far out exceed any rate of return in the stock market over the long term, and so relative to real estate. But that's not to say real estate is a bad investment. I don't understand. I've owned real estate. I just mean that I think people kind of skew how good of an investment real estate really is.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing was the unfair treatment from Ottawa. I think living in Alberta my entire life, and anybody I think that's living here in Alberta, I have no understanding as to why they would vote Liberal. I just don't see any benefit as to why and what they've done for Alberta ever.
Okay.
And federally, and it's just it's so obvious with the way you've put it, and the equalization payments and all of that. I think it's exactly what you're saying, and and I'm not a separatist, but boy, it sure makes it hard not to think we'd be better off.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I understand that. Okay, thank you. Yeah, good to hear from you. Just on that Alberta issue, and I mentioned the carbon tax carve-out and wanting to go to the federal court and have that declared unconstitutional. That's just one scrap that they're having right now with the Trudeau Liberals in Ottawa. The other is the emissions cap on the oil and gas sector. Don't forget about that. If you're a taxpayer in Alberta, how can you forget? You're probably hearing the ads all the time. Scrap the cap, scrap the cap. They're airing those ads all across the country. Ottawa says, Guilbeault and company, if you can't trust Stephen Guilbeault, look at the guy. Doesn't he look so trustworthy in his orange jumpsuit? He says we need an oil and gas emissions cap if we're ever going to meet our targets for reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. And he says it's an emissions cap and not a production cap. Alberta says, no, it's not. You can't cap emissions without capping production, you dummies. And I think another irritant, and something the Liberals have never fully explained on this, is why are you just imposing an emissions cap on oil and gas? Like only oil and gas. Sure, it's a big emitter, but it's not the only emitting industry in Canada. Why aren't, for example, if the issue is fairness in federalism, why aren't you doing this to the auto sector in Southern Ontario or the steel industry in Southern Ontario? Is it because of all those seats that vote Liberal in Southern Ontario? Why aren't you doing this in the, the coal mining industry in British Columbia? Big business. Why aren't you doing this to the nickel mining industry in Northern Ontario? Or the nickel mining industry in Newfoundland? Or the cement industry in Quebec? Or how many other industries in Quebec? The aluminum industry or the iron ore industry and on and on and on. They're all big polluters. They're not getting an emissions cap. It's only the oil and gas sector that faces emissions cap. Why is that? It's not fair, Alberta would say. Kim in Alberta. Thanks for calling, Kim.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for
You're
the discussion
welcome.
today.
Yep.
I've really enjoyed it, actually, especially listening about the housing.
Yes.
And I thought I would call in with maybe a little bit different perspective.
Okay.
I have a vested interest in the fact that I have one daughter turning 18 in 6 months, and I have another coming up about 5 years behind her. And I know that kids are having a hard time now kind of seeing a future. There's turmoil everywhere. Housing is high. Cost of living is high. I homeschool my kids, and one of our topics of discussion in one of our classes, we actually talk about mortgage and cost of living and job and wage and things like that. So we've done this over the last few years. My husband and my perspective was I believe, and my husband believes, that investing in real estate and not paying someone else's mortgage for them is a good way to go. And yes, things are tough now, but I think it's just a different type of tough than what it was, say, in my mom's generation.
Okay, what's the difference, do you think?
There's quite a few. I mean, I'm sure you could probably talk for hours on it, but my mom, for instance, they owned a home where they lived in the upstairs apartment, and her mom's sister and her family lived below. So they had a multiple income household. They transitioned then, the one family moved out below, the sister's family, and my grandparents moved in below, but left the apartment upstairs for my mom and her siblings. And so they shared that apartment, being of working age, and contributed to the mortgage and had their own sort of living space. And I do see that today, for instance, when you see the newer builds going up that have garages that have a mother-in-law suite above them.
Right.
So it gives people the option to either have family move in and contribute or to rent and
Or a
kind
tenant,
of subsidize that mortgage, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there are things kind of that I think are a little bit similar but dissimilar, if that makes any sense,
Sure.
in those ways.
Okay.
But my husband and I, we live in a very small town. We live in a town of about 500 people. We're about 40 minutes from Airdrie and about an hour from Calgary city limits. Now, the reason that we ended up moving somewhere so small was cost of housing. It's incredible, the difference, just an hour outside of town in a smaller community, even to build your own home and buy the property, the land to build on, acreages, which is what we live on now, a small acreage. And this has given us an opportunity to save on the buy. We chose something that was a little bit of a fixer-upper, which we encourage our kids to look at as well, just to make money on the buy. And we know that this will hold its value and increase in value with the things that we're doing with the property.
So you're putting a lot of sweat equity into it then.
Sweat equity, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And we have a lot of older housing that you can buy, quote-unquote, on the cheap, and put a little bit of elbow grease in, put the new windows,
Gotcha.
Look at solar programs, those sorts of things to build the equity on that place.
You should teach a course. You should do a series of YouTube videos or something. All right, look, we got to run. We're way over time. But I thank you so much for your call today.
Okay, thank you.
Great to hear from you. Yep. Bye-bye. We do have some lines available, and not a whole lot of time, but time for 2-3 more calls here on Talkback on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
On to home ownership. Is it still a good way to build wealth? Let's go to Shelley. Hi, Shelley.
Hey, Shelley. Hi, how are you today?
Wonderful, Shelley. Never been better.
Good. Good. Well, I'm a retired bank manager. I was in banking for 30 years and a manager for the last 20 years of my career.
Right.
And I want to start out by commending the last caller who's homeschooling her daughters, and she's educating them. And I think that's what needs to be done in our schools. They need to be educated on how to save and the options available to get into your first home. For example, you can use your RSPs. If you're a first-time home buyer, you can use your RSPs for the down payment on your home. So let's say you've got, the one caller had indicated that an engineer made $70,000 a year and the surplus that he had was $850. So let's just say you take $300 a month out of that and put it into an RSP. At the end of the year, you've got, $3,600. You're going to get a tax credit of 40% of that. And turn around and take that tax return and put it back into the RSP again. In a couple of years, you've accumulated your down payment, and it is a pre-tax return.
Right.
In other words, if you put your money into just a savings account, you're taxed on that return, which is a whole other issue because that pisses me off. The government taxes the money we save.
Right.
But if you put it into an RSP, it accumulates.
But my question is, at the end of it all, once you do that and you put that money into the house, do you think, because what I'm keep circling back to this report that came out this week that says it's very clear you're going to be better off if you own a home versus, say, renting for 30 years or renting for 40 years. Do you think that's still the case?
Yes, 100%.
Or has the market changed so much with interest rates and prices that maybe that's not going to be the case anymore?
Well, no, I don't agree.
You don't think so?
The interest rates are.
No, it's not an opinion. I'm just asking. Right?
Yeah. I don't agree because my first mortgage in the late 70s was like 13% and 18%.
Oh yeah, the good old days. Yeah.
So for them to be able to get, I don't even know what rates are nowadays, but
5. 5, 6.
Okay,
yeah.
so a 5% return. There's no easier way, in my opinion, to accumulate wealth than to buy and sell homes because of the capital gains exemption. But I also think they shouldn't rush into it.
Okay.
I think if you do buy your first home, you need to kind of have the mindset that you're going to stay there 4 or 5 years.
Oh yeah.
And let that grow. And then what we did, I have 3 daughters, and what we did with them when they finished their post-secondary education, we encouraged them to stay home for a year or two. And instead of charging them rent, which a lot of parents do to try to teach their children how to manage their money, we forced them to put it into an RSP. And they had to show us each month that they had put it into an RSP rather than charging them rent.
Oh, very disciplined.
And by the time
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you, Shelley. Good to hear from you. Yep. Be right back.
Thank
Wrap
you.
things up with a few more calls, and that'll be it for the Thursday Talkback. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Just a reminder, Friday free-for-all Talkback Hour. Tomorrow, that's always a lot of fun. We don't come up with the topics. We let you take the lead on Fridays. Adventures in Talk Radio, the Friday free-for-all tomorrow here on Now You Know. Hello, Bruce in Calgary.
Hey, Rob. Nice to speak to you and your listeners today.
Yeah.
I was hoping to maybe just start out with a high-level statement, which is, housing prices may be expensive, but the real issue is actually how much money people have left after taxes to pay for their homes.
Okay.
And I think that's what we're really hearing people express. So it's an example in Europe where the ownership is much, much lower. The governments there take, 60, 70, 80% of people's incomes. And so they really don't have money left to invest in property. And I'm going to give you a real-world example of how this is in play here in Canada. If you look at during COVID, when they were giving out benefits to everyone, between $1,000 and $2,000 a month, and people were able to make it through that crisis with that amount of money. So the real issue is if all levels of government were to take combined $2,000 less a month from all of the taxpayers, they would have the income to pay for the higher houses.
Right.
So it's really about, the way the economy works is the government's at the center. They set all the policies. And, the government that's been in power for a decade now, we know who that is. And we also know that the carbon tax is a joke. We're already carbon neutral. It's just a tax they're trying to make people feel good about paying, but our country is already carbon neutral. So it's really about the level of taxation that they're taking. And we've gone from a society that you could support a family on one income to the point where with two incomes you can barely afford houses. And it's not because we're not making money. The government is taking far too much money.
Okay.
And they're being far too inefficient. And I'll give you an example. I'm a land developer. I build lots. So here in the city of Calgary, we build the same roads as we did a decade ago. We install the same streetlights. Road pavement hasn't changed. It takes twice as long to get a project approved now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and cost how much more? And how much more does it cost? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. All this bureaucracy, all these government wages.
Yeah. We could cite you chapter and verse on that. Bruce, look, we're a little tight on time, so we're going to have to wrap things up here.
Taxation efficiency, it's the government's fault here.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Good to hear from you. Good to hear from you. So again, Friday Free for All Talkback Hour. Tomorrow, it's always the final 2 hours of Now You Know with Rob Snow. 24 degrees. I hate to rub that into our friends in Calgary, but that's what it is here in your nation's capital. It is a record-breaking temperature. Obviously, the carbon tax is not high enough because it's not doing anything. Here we go. Last day of October, 24 degrees, David. You probably get a lot of trick-or-treaters at your place right downtown in the big city, Dave.
Hoping for it.
So, yeah.
Hoping for it. I like the little kids. I do well with like the 0 to 5 demographic.
Okay.
That's my sweet spot. They're always fun.
What are you giving out?
Oh, I've got well, I didn't purchase it. Hannah purchased 2 big boxes of chocolate at newly inflated prices. There's this cocoa shortage.
Cocoa shortage.
It's like $19 for a box of 100 small candy bars.
Okay.
But that's what we've got.
Right.
It's on hand. I'll try to give all of it away.
Can you bring in whatever's left over?
Well,
tomorrow?
Currently, I don't know where it is. Hannah has hidden it
she's
somewhere.
Smart.
If she lets me know
Smart
where
lady.
the leftovers are, I'll try to bring some in.
Okay. Happy Halloween, everyone. Back tomorrow. Latest breaking news coming up on News Radio.